We're now going to be moving to the F note in our shape and orientating our intervals around it. As we do so, considering we're using the same shape, that means that we're going to be looking at a Lydian type of mode. Now, we looked at the Lydian mode up top here. Now we're going to use the Lydian mode down here. And I want to give a quick recap since this is the first time we're going to a new note here and a new mode of the overall project. Why do we want to learn basically the Lydian mode and the intervals related to it? Noting that the Lydian mode is possibly, at least for me, the second least mode used to actually build a song around. Meaning I don't usually play like just in the Lydian mode as my tonic mode, although I think it would be good practice to do that, and that might just be just me, but except for the only other one that has least would be the Locrian, right? But as you're playing in other modes, such as the C major and the A minor, you're going to want to build chords off of the F note. And when you build chords off of the F note, you could start to remember that its related position to the major scale is the 4 position, and therefore it's going to build a major triad, and that might help us enough to build basically a chord. But it would be if we want to go beyond the 5th to the 7, 9, 11, and 13, we would rather know the whole modal construction. Because if I know it's the Lydian mode and I know the intervals in the Lydian mode, then when I get to the F note and I'm playing in some other mode, when I get to that chord, I can play more than just 3 notes that fit in, right? I can build a more complex chord. So that's going to be that's one of the major ideas. Now also remember that we're going to be building it off of the note that's on the bottom of the guitar, this F note, and that's below the fault line. I call this the fault line because it's shifted to the right, and the tuning is different between these two strings as to any other string. So by practicing the bottom of the guitar, we're going to be practicing the impact of that fault line. As we do so, we want to think about how that impacts the shapes, because on the guitar we have this issue of the shapes are not exactly the same all the way down because of this tectonic plate shift, which leads a lot of people to just say, well, I'm just not going to learn the shapes. I'm just going to learn like the full bar shapes as a shape. I'm not going to learn the relative positions like the interval positions, which I don't think is a good idea because if the interval positions are really useful to be able to learn. So that's another reason it's going to be useful to kind of learn the intervals down here. Also, when we learn the intervals and see this as our root note, you'll note that we're basically building chords from an inverted perspective. So normally a chord, the standard, like if this was an A minor chord, it would be the A, C, and then the E, which would be a root, 3rd, and 5th. Or if I take this F up here and I do it in order, the lowest note is the root, and then the 3rd is going to be, this is a major 3rd, is going to be the next octave, and then the highest pitch note is going to be the 5th. That would be in order. Now, if I switch the octaves on which is the lowest note, we call that an inversion. So inversions happen all the time on the guitar. We possibly don't even think about them as much as the piano because we're possibly just trying to reach something that we can reach. So I'm not really going to talk about a first inversion or a second inversion. I'm not that sophisticated, although I'd like to get there. Maybe I'll practice on being more sophisticated to say, well, this is the first and second and third inversion and whatnot. But I do want to be able to recognize that anytime I play like an F chord, I can do something different if I know some of the inversions, right? If I can play an F chord with something other than like a bar chord, like over here on the standard bar chord, that bar chord is going to take up a lot of space if I'm trying to layer it on top of what other people are doing, right? Because if there's a bass player or something, I'm playing a really heavy kind of chord. But if I can build something on the higher pitches of the guitar, then I can do something similar that adds something but doesn't compete with what someone else is doing. So that's another reason why we would want to kind of think about this bottom side of the guitar. It also helps us with our inverse intervals, because when I go above the string here, I have to look at the inverse distance. Whereas when I go below the string, I usually look at the normal distance. So that means most people aren't good at counting above. They can't really see how to get to the 1, the 3, the 5 going above it, except possibly by shape. And even when we look at it by shape, most people see the shape from top to bottom and can't visualize it from bottom to top. And I want to emphasize as I'm doing this that a lot of people you might think that you can do that, or then you might realize that you're not as good as you thought about doing that. And then you think you're kind of like you're not smart or so. I just can't visualize the thing. It's like, no, most people can't do it. Some people are better at visualizing than others, and flipping things around in their head, and that's a spatial memory kind of thing. But anybody can get way better by just practicing, right? All you do is you just practice it over and over, and I want to see it forwards, I want to see it backwards. Just like if you're accounting, I want to count forwards, I want to count backwards, I want to be able to count from any number going forwards and backwards. And then if you wanted to, you can count by 5s, forwards, backwards. You can count by 3s or something that most people can't do. It's not like it's a genius thing to do. It's just people just practiced it over and over to do it that way. With the musical alphabet, what we want to do is be able to see the fretboard from multiple different areas. That's, in my mind, that is what allows you to be more flexible and move around the fretboard a lot more. All right, so that's going to be the general idea why I want to really focus down here and not just look at the intervals starting at the top of the guitar and going down, but start at the bottom of the guitar and think about going up above it. All right, so let's compare the Lydian mode. It's like, why would I want to learn the Lydian mode? How does it fit in to what I normally play, most likely being a major and minor scale? So if I go up to the top, we have the major scale. And so that's the first thing we typically learn because it is the key for Western musics that we compare all the other modes to. So if I want to pack as much information about different scales in my mind, I possibly want to learn the construction, the shapes, and the formulas, and the intervals related to the major, and then try to build my understanding from that, like counting on the alphabet from a different perspective. Learn the different modes, which are basically just like that, counting from a different starting point in the alphabet, right? And it's counting upwards and backwards and that kind of thing. So that's going to be, so if we look at this shape is what I would call the major, this whole shape on the whole fretboard is what I would call the major scale shape. These are all the notes in the major scale and the related modes. We're going to be in the middle of the guitar because that allows us to then play our intervals both towards the back of the guitar and towards the body of the guitar. So that allows us to choose the interval that's closest when we go up or down any particular string. In the middle of the guitar, this is possibly the most common shape that I would call shape number 1. That would be in a pentatonic. If I played all the notes, it would look like that. That's going from A to A, which means we're playing basically in an A minor. If I went from C to C, same notes, then we'd be playing in a C major. So those are the two that people learn the most common in Western music. But I can start from any other note and play those same notes, right? If I start from if I start from the D, I play the Dorian. If I start from the E, I'd be playing the Phrygian. So I could start to kind of see each of the notes as a relative position, 1 through 7, but I also would like to name them from a modal construction as they relate to the major scale. So I'm gonna actually number the modes in a permanent modal construction 1 through 7. So I'm gonna say then the Lydian is gonna be mode number 4 as it relates to the major scale, because that helps me to see where it is relative to the major scale. That allows me to see in my shape that this F is always in this little box shape right here, right? It's always on the bottom right of this square. And so I can start to kind of recognize it that way, is a way I can also visualize it. And so that's going to be useful. And then the 3 ways that I want to visualize this thing is by looking at the shapes. So we break this fretboard into 5 shapes, noting we could break it into more than 5 shapes. We could do a 3-note per string shape. We could do a 2-note per string shape. I've looked at that in prior presentations, but traditionally we do the 5 shapes, and those 5 shapes often correspond to the caged system, where we take the shapes in open position and move them up the fretboard. So this shape, for example, from the perspective of the major scale, could be called the G shape, because the C chord has a G shape, right? So you can see that G shape right here on the C chord in essence. So you could name the shapes that way. We also could learn this whole process by looking at the formulas, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If I start from the C, I'd also like to learn that formula from every other starting point. And then we can also learn it by interval by looking at a point, that's going to be the F in our case, and looking at the intervals around that point to help to build the shape around it. That's the one we're working on here. That really allows us to identify chords, for example, and start to see the relationship between the chords. So that's what we're going to be practicing here. From a practical standpoint, remember, most people learn the major scale and then they learn basically the minor scale, possibly, but then you're often going to have problems because now I can see all the notes in the major or minor scale, but I don't know how to build a chord off of them necessarily. How do I build a chord? Standard chord has a 1-3-5 in it, 1-3-5. The 1 and the 3, or the 1 and the 5, are the same relative intervals. It's always the 3 that's going to be different. So the chord construction, I can start with a power chord, just adding the 5, just 2 notes, and then I can think about how can I add the 3. The 3, if I look at it from the perspective of the major, has the 1, 4, 5 build major chords, and then the 2, 3, and 6 build the minor chords. The 7 is like a minor with a flat 5th. So we can start to learn that and start to say, okay, which of these notes is the 1, 4, 5? I can build major chords on that. Which of them are the 2, 3, and 6? I can build minor. But it becomes a problem if I'm in another scale, like the minor scale, in which case now it's going to be in a different order, right? What can help me with that? Well, if I name the minor scale number 6, and then I look at all the relative positions as they relate to the major scale, I can start to remember these by mode, right? So if I remember them by mode, I can say the Aeolian mode, no matter where it is always going to be a minor chord construction. And so that's going to be the idea here. So with the Lydian, whenever the Lydian comes up, which is the one we're going to be working on here, then that I know that it has a major chord construction. So I just basically can memorize that it's going to have a major chord construction. So that's going to be basically the idea of that, or why we would want to learn the Lydian, right? If I'm playing in the major key, in other words, and I get to that F note, I want to be able to know that it's going to be a major chord that I make, which I could know because it's on the relative position 4 and 5, but I can also name it by mode. I'm going to call it mode number 4, and I know that the 4 mode, the Lydian mode, is being named in relative position to the major scale, and therefore I know the intervals are always going to be the same. I know at the least that it's a major mode, therefore has the 1, 3, 5, the 3 is going to be major as opposed to minor. And if I want to go further than that and look at the 7, 9, 11, and 13, I can do that, right? Then I can build more complex chords beyond just the 1, 3, 5 if I know that Lydian. So the point is, even if you're not playing in Lydian, it's useful to learn Lydian, because when you get to the Lydian note in any of the scales that you do play, which is usually the major scale or the minor scale, then you know whether you can build a major or minor chord, and beyond that, you might have more idea of what you can build beyond that. All right, so how do we do this? Let's learn the intervals for the major scale and then compare the Lydian to it. So the major scale has a perfect first, a 2-note away major second, a 4-note away major third, a 5-note away perfect fifth, a 5-note away perfect fourth, a 7-note away perfect fifth, a 9-note away major sixth, an 11-note away major 7. Now, the Lydian, we know the 1, 4, 5 are majors. Therefore, it's going to have a major chord construction, meaning it's going to have a major third, 4-note away major third. So it's also then going to only have one interval difference than the major scale. So let's go down to the Lydian and check it out. So what do we have? We have a 0-note away perfect first. That's what we always have in any of the scales. We have a 2-note away major second. That matches what we have on the major scale. We have a 4-note away major third. We would expect that to be the case because it's a major mode. That's the defining interval making it a major mode, as opposed to a minor mode, which would have a 3-note away minor third. And here's the really funny one, which is kind of why I think Lydian possibly is not as used of a mode, because it has this 6-note away, and I'm calling it here, that my worksheet pulls it in as a diminished fifth, but you can also name it, and we should name it here, as an augmented fourth. So I'm not gonna like mess with my worksheet because it's a formula that's doing this, but see, it's this, well, it's pulling from up there, but anyways, so we're just gonna deal with it. So you can call it a diminished fifth would be the distance, but it's not a fifth in relation to here because it's the fourth position. Therefore, instead of calling it a diminished fifth, we should call it an augmented fourth, even though those two refer to a 6-note distance. Either one does, but in the Lydian, it should be a fourth. Okay, and so that's going to be the weird one. And then we have a 7-note away perfect fifth, which is normal. And then we have a 9-note away major 6, which is what we would expect in a major scale, and an 11-note away major 7, which is what we would expect in a major scale. So it's this one, it's that B right there. That's the funny one. So note that if you learned this shape, if you learned this shape, you would have learned the C major shape, the A minor shape is the same notes, and the related modes, including the Lydian mode. Now, what if I didn't want to play in Lydian, but rather instead of playing in F Lydian, I want to be playing in F major? Well, one way I could do that, instead of trying to reorientate my whole thought process to come up with a different shape based on possibly, like we might say that this C note, how would I normally do that? I would find the F, which would possibly be out here, and then rebuild this same shape, right, around this F, and then, well, actually, wait, the F would be right here. So I would build this shape around the F because it was a C here, I'd have an F here, and then you'd have the related shape. But another way I could do it is to say I want to orientate this shape to the F major. Well, I can just look at that one interval difference, the B, and say it's been an augmented fourth, meaning it got pushed up, so I need to flat it. So I can take all the B's and flatten them, and that will give me the shape for the F major. That's one way that we can kind of see how these things are related to each other, and you can do that for any of the modes. I can take any of the modes and convert them to its closest related mode by just fixing one interval. In this case, happening to be the Lydian is closest to the major scale, right? The mixed Lydian is closest to the major scale. G mixed Lydian is closest to G major. The Aeolian is what it is. It's the minor scale. So you could take the Aeolian to the other closest mode, like a Dorian, or you can convert it to a Phrygian, right? Because there's only one interval difference. The Locrian's the weird one. We won't get into that now. The Ionian is the major scale. But you could convert the major scale to Lydian or Mixolydian by just converting one interval. And the Dorian is a minor mode. So it's closest to the Aeolian. So I could convert this D Dorian. This shape is a D Dorian shape. If I send around the D, I can convert it to a D minor by simply doing one interval. And the Phrygian is a minor mode, so I can convert it from the E Phrygian to an E minor by shifting one interval, right? So it's just something to keep in mind on how you might shift these things around. Because remember, how would most people shift? They would say, well, I found this shape here, and I see my root note on this shape on the top two strings, and if I want to make a C to an F root note, I'm just going to find that shape on the top string and build my shape around it. Perfectly fine way to do it. That's how most people would do it. But it's not, of course, the only way to do it. And sometimes you would like to be able to shift between possible shapes in the same position, right? And so you can, okay, enough of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to then go through this.